Brilliant. I think we're live. Just going to double check if that's the case. Yep, absolutely. Cool. Okay, well, obviously, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this week's webinar with SSG. This evening, Laura Mould and myself, Max, obviously have the pleasure of talking to you guys again about all things starting your own recruitment business, where tonight what we're going to do is really focus on one particular area when it comes to actually physically launching your recruitment business that we obviously collectively feel is actually pretty fundamental to obviously making sure you have any sort of foundation to then grow your business in obviously whatever way that you want. But just before obviously we delve a little deeper into that one area that obviously every recruiter looking to start their own agency needs to pay close attention to, obviously during the launch of your business, I thought it might be worth taking the next maybe 5-10 minutes or so just to outline where that particular area sits in terms of the full launch of your recruitment business. So in terms of what we'll be speaking about this evening, obviously, as you can see, there's going to be obviously 3 sections. So the first one, you've obviously got the 4 pillars of your business, where really we're going to delve into quite generally speaking, obviously, but really just identifying what you need to do to create that foundation for you to then create the business that obviously you want. Section 2, we're going to then delve into actually building what we refer to as pillar 1, which basically is a more in-depth conversation around the legal infrastructure, which obviously Laura is going to talk to you guys in a bit of detail about. And then thirdly, we're going to talk about some of the consequences of not being compliant. So basically making sure that from day one, you're protected in the ways that you need to be. And obviously, we're going to go through a couple of examples and some case studies where companies haven't been as compliant as they should be, and obviously the impact of that going forward. So section 1. So what's really become evident for us over the last 13 or so years of launching and supporting recruitment businesses is that when it comes to the launch side of your business, there tend to be these 4 key areas that need to be focused upon, which I'm really going to briefly run through now, very generally, as I don't want to ramble on too much. But I'm sure hopefully if we get another opportunity to obviously talk to you guys, we can explore each particular pillar in a lot more detail. But for now, here's obviously a brief overview of the 4 areas that we feel are incredibly important when it comes to launching and naturally starting your own recruitment company. And to be honest, just on the side, I think it's pretty valuable to anyone who is either seriously thinking about starting on their own or has recently started to really be made aware of the areas or the pillars that you're going to need to focus upon. So pillar 1 is known as obviously the legal and compliance stance and everything like that. So this is really going to be an area where Laura is going to delve a lot further into. But, so without treading on Laura's toes too much, really, we're going to be talking here about everything from obviously the company formation to the trademarking to data protection to making sure that you protect your business from an insurance standpoint to essentially making sure that you launch your business and make sure that obviously you've got your tried and tested compliance processes that ultimately act as obviously legal protection for your business going forward. Pillar 2 or area 2 is known as obviously the creative and branding side. So here, obviously, clues in the name, but you're probably talking about everything from creating your logos to your stationery, to your letterheads, to your emails, your email signatures, your business cards, your marketing collateral, your remarketing tools. I mean, all those weird and wonderful things that naturally sit alongside the likes of obviously your social media presence and your platforms there, and of course your website. So when you're kind of thinking about the creative and design aspects of your business, obviously everything from your logos to obviously your website, making sure that you have those on-site and off-site factors that will ultimately help your website not only look great and promote the feel that you want for your business, but also work for yourself, obviously, as a procurement tool as well. Pillar 3 is obviously you need to start thinking about, of course, the resource allocation in your business. So obviously it's an area whereby obviously you need to understand what the resources and tools you feel you'll need. New business is naturally going to need to be able to grow and honestly make the revenue that you want, whether that's your job boards, particular multi-posting systems, obviously things like your CRM trackers and everything like that. Alongside things like, obviously, you might want to start thinking about vacancy reporting, training materials, basically from a resource point of view, much like everything, making sure that you just have that foundation in place as to if, for example, you're looking to grow a business, you have the training material in place when you start to bring on new staff and everything like that. And then finally, we've obviously got pillar 4, which is really everything to do with the back office infrastructure of your business. So really formally known as obviously the accounting templates and everything like that. So here you're really talking about everything from, you know, invoicing procedures to credit control to the VAT man to obviously the tax man to your monthly management accounts, your MMAs. Of course, to, you know, the slightly more ongoing provisions that obviously go with creating those monthly management accounts as well. Essentially, all the accounting templates and infrastructure that then, you know, act as a foundation to grow the business in naturally whatever direction you want. And then obviously what you're going to now look at is, you know, your 4 pillars of your business. So briefly, obviously running through them just now, you've obviously got the legal and compliance aspect of things. Naturally start then thinking about the creative and branding elements of your business. Of course, the resource allocation and the tools there in terms of what resources you feel you're going to need to do the job in hand. And then obviously from a back office provision, the foundations and the infrastructure from an accounting side of things to really obviously then allow you to grow the business in whatever way you want. So obviously we're not going to delve into each individual pillar today, obviously in the interest of time, but I think what's going to be valuable is obviously I've now passed you over to my colleague Laura, who's going to really delve into pillar 1. So obviously the legal and compliance infrastructure and everything that goes naturally with that.
Thank you very much. So thanks, Max, for a lovely introduction, and good evening, everybody. So as Max has explained, I'm going to talk to you a little bit in more detail about the legal infrastructure, so the legal and compliance aspect. And really, we're focusing here on the launch of the new business. So if you are thinking about going out on your own, these are things to consider. If you have already done so, it may be that you need to retrospectively go back and kind of reassess some of these things and make sure that you've got the right structure in place before you continue. So we're going to start with the beginning, obviously. Choosing a company name is the first thing we're going to talk about. So most people think this is going to be the simplest part, but in reality, for a lot of people, it can prove a little bit tricky. So the first thing we always encourage is that you choose something meaningful to you that represents your vision of your new business. And really the key thing is that it isn't already in use by someone else. So we'll come on to that shortly. So in our experience, the more unique the name, the better. So I would always recommend steer clear of those classics like First Recruitment and choose something more individual. After all, gone are the days when First Recruitment would be top of the list in the yellow pages. With search engines now like Google utilising really complicated and ever-changing algorithms, actually the more distinctive your company name, the better. We also encourage the ventures that we support to choose something that's meaningful to them. So not necessarily their own name, of course, but something that they can connect to. So my advice when you're thinking about this would be draw up a shortlist, maybe 10 names, things that you like. Try not to get too attached to one because it's sod's law that that'll be the one that's not available. But have a choice of names before you move on to step 2. And step 2 is ascertaining if that name is safe to use. Most of you will already know, and first and foremost, it's whether the name is available for registration at Companies House. So we're recommending here that you register as a limited company. So you can check with Companies House if the name that you want is available. If it isn't, then you need to remove it from your shortlist. So it's nice and easy. There are also a number of words which can't be used in a company name. Sensitive words, they're deemed as, and so these should be checked as well to avoid any hiccups when you come to register the business. Next thing is just a simple Google search. So really you're looking to pick up any businesses who are trading under the name you want, even though that might not be their official registered name. It will also highlight if the words you want to use in your company name are particularly competitive search terms or if there might be some confusion. So a really good example of this is a company that we support called TO Resourcing. So of course, when you enter this into Google, it brings up everything with the words to and resourcing in. And we've had to work quite hard to get the business ranked highly. So it's simple things like that that it's a good thing to consider when you're choosing the name. Also, if you're choosing a name, for example, X Recruitment, when you're doing the Google search, I would also substitute recruitment and put in words that are similar, like resourcing, personnel, consultancy, etc., so that you're covering all eventualities. Next up, I'd be checking that there are no trademarks registered, which might conflict with the chosen name. There's no quicker way to be on the receiving end of a scary solicitor's letter than to register a company with a similar name to a trademarked brand, so it's always worth checking that. And finally, I would look at the domain or URL that matches the name and make sure that that is available. Gmail accounts and similar just aren't going to cut it when you're presenting your business to the outside world. So you'll want to ensure you can purchase the domain to enable your website and email to be hosted professionally. Once you've done all that and you've got the name sorted, then we move on to forming the company. And so there's a number of different things to think about here. First thing is identifying the shareholders and directors you want in the business. So if it's just you, that might be quite simple as sole shareholder and director. It might be a little bit more complicated, though, if you're going into business with someone else or you're taking investment in exchange for equity. In any case, if there is more than one shareholder in the business, you'll want a robust shareholders agreement in place, of course, and you want to consider if all of the shares in the business will be the same class or whether differing classes, for example, A and B classes, would be more appropriate. When you register the business, the registered address is publicly available online at Companies House, so you will probably want to use an address that isn't your home address, just to avoid unwanted mail and potential queries around your home insurance. And finally, although a company secretary isn't required, it is often useful to appoint somebody or a business as they carry out key duties. Oftentimes, business will appoint their accountant as company secretary. So that's company formation. So it's kind of the first step when you're setting up the business. We'll move on now to talk about some of the rules around data protection and insurances. So once you've registered your business and you're ready to trade, then you need to register with the ICO for data protection. So that's a legal requirement. It doesn't cost the earth. It's about £35 per year for a small business. So for a startup, that should be sufficient. It's not registering is a criminal offence. So it's really, really important that you do so. And it's really important that when you get the reminders through every year, you make sure that you renew that. With data protection GDPR, I'm sure you'll all have heard there's been quite a lot of scaremongering about recently, particularly around GDPR coming into force in May of next year. Generally speaking, common sense prevails with data protection principles. So, a good working knowledge of the core principles of GDPR is important, but use your common sense and generally you'll be on the right track. So the key things are notifying the candidate how and why you'll store their data, how long you'll store it for, how they can view the data you hold, or how to have it removed or opt out of communications. And of course, who you'll share it with. So which clients you're sending their CV to with their permission, of course. So it's mainly, what you do now as best practice with a couple of added bits extra in. You'll find that most CRM systems have automated processes in place, particularly with GDPR coming into force. A lot of them have kind of upped their game on this. So it's wise to try and utilize those features where you can. We'll talk about the CRM systems at a later date in the creative branding technical part. But it's worthwhile if you can utilize a CRM, it will make your life a little bit easier. So that's data protection. What about insurances then? So it's a good idea to have insurances in place right from the start of the business for your protection, even before they become a legal requirement. If you're moving into an office immediately, many landlords will ask that you have a minimal level of insurance in place, and some of the clients that you work with will stipulate that as well. So the three key insurances we've listed there are employer's liability, public liability, and professional indemnity. For a typical recruitment startup in a low-risk sector, we'd normally expect people to be paying a premium of around £300 to £600 a year for all three together. But as with all insurances, shop around, get the best deal, and make sure that you're not paying a high premium. It's also worthwhile thinking about sector-specific insurances if they're required. So a good example of that, again, is driver's negligence. Tends to be a bit more expensive. So obviously factor that in if you know you need something specific for your area. Okay, so moving on. Signing on the dotted line, something we all like to do. We're going to talk about terms of business. So why are they so important? Well, this is your contract. So your contract with the client or your contract with a worker. This is what makes sure that you get paid ultimately. And so it's really important that you get the right terms of business in place and that you have the right procedure to make sure that these are always signed. So what should you have in place? Well, for permanent recruiters, obviously it's permanent terms of business. So that's nice and easy. For anybody that's running temps or contractors, you'll need to have obviously a contract with your client for the temps that you're providing, whether that's via a limited company, via PAYE or via umbrella. And then you'll also have to have a contract with your temps. So again, whether that's limited company, umbrella or PAYE. So make sure that you've got the right contracts in place and the right terms with both your clients and your candidates. A lot of people ask us why they can't just, excuse me, copy the terms they use in their current business. So if you're already employed by somebody, what's to stop you taking their terms of business and using them in your own? Well, I suppose nothing to a certain extent, but they will have an element of copyright and an element of protection. No doubt you'll be under restrictive covenants as well, and there'll be clauses in your contract to do with confidentiality and not using resources. So we would always advise that you don't use any terms or forms that you use in your current employer. When you start your own business, make sure that you're starting everything from fresh. With the terms, we've had there our good old marriage, so to have and to hold, making sure that you keep copies. So with the clients, the terms should be signed before you do anything. So before you start sending CVs, before you start introducing candidates, make sure that you've got those terms signed. And those are what is going to offer you the protection if that client subsequently takes somebody on behind your back. That's what will get you the fee if those terms are signed. If you can't physically get them signed, then agreement in writing is second best. Don't try and fall back onto email signature disclaimers or anything like that. It's just not going to work. So signed in the first instance, if not signed, then agreed in writing. Okay, so terms kind of leads us on to compliance processes. And so this is quite important, and it's probably something that you do already in your own roles within the businesses that you're working at the moment. And it's really just making sure that you carry any good habits through to your own business and get rid of any bad ones. So the first thing I suggest is just make it part of your routine. So make it something that you do every single day with every single client and every single candidate, and that you just put a really clear process in place. So even if it's just writing on a piece of paper, step 1 to 10, this is what I do when I start dealing with a new client, sign up a new temp, start working with a new permanent candidate. So make it part of your routine and just make it non-negotiable that it has to be done. Candidate registration procedures are really important. So particularly on the temp and contract side, with contractors now with the Criminal Finance Act and various IR35 changes, it's ever more important that you're doing your due diligence and ensuring that they are meant to be working as contractors. So the candidate registration procedures are going to be really important there, making sure that not only are you asking for the right information, but also that you're not asking for anything that you shouldn't be. Similarly with right to work and ID checks, for permanent candidates, obviously this is not necessarily a requirement, but I would say it's best practice to do this anyway. If you can't meet your candidates, then at the minimum, you want to be either getting a scan or photocopy of their ID and making sure that the person in the ID matches the person you're speaking to. So whether that's by photograph, FaceTime, Skyping, anything like that, just to make sure that you're absolutely confident that the person is who they say they are. Similarly with references, you know, again, some permanent recruiters, these aren't required. It's down to the client who is ultimately going to be employing the candidate to undertake references. But again, it might well be best practice or something that's required by the client. And of course, for temps, we would always say you have to get references. So again, try and build this into your routine and make sure that you have a system whereby you can check if a reference hasn't been returned. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of legal infrastructure and compliance. There is obviously a lot more depth that we could go into, but in the interest of time, we've kind of just gone for the broad overview. So Max is going to take over now to talk to you a little bit about the consequences of non-compliance and go through some case studies.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think, you know, as I'm sure you'll all agree, Laura raised some really good points, and I thought what might be useful at the back end of the webinar tonight is to really go through one or two case studies, you know, examples of where recruitment companies have unfortunately not been as compliant as they should have been, and how they obviously fell victim to not having the right procedures in place. Now, there's a lot of ways to not be compliant, but obviously the conduct regulations will determine some things when it comes to your own recruitment company. And obviously there are going to be three things that we're going to talk about, a couple of which obviously Laura did touch upon in her bit just before. But one of the best examples of obviously, unfortunately, not being as compliant as you should be is non-payment of the national minimum wage. So if you're an agency, for whatever reason, you obviously don't pay your worker the national minimum wage at any stage, then the consequences and penalties are pretty hefty. You know, not only are you fined, but you also, in some cases, you know, get name and shame publicly by data released by HMRC. You might remember, I think it was back in July or August of this year, when the Daily Mirror reported over 200 companies who were subject to not paying the national minimum wage. I think they even went as far as publicising photos of the shops or the offices in question as well. So most famously in that, you might remember Argos, obviously topping the list there. And this, you know, if we're not being too cynical about it, it might simply just be down to an error of not having the right compliance procedures in place, and therefore obviously non-payment of the national minimum wage in some respects. But, you know, the consequences aren't as simple. Secondly, I'm sure you've all heard of those recruitment companies out there. I know that Laura did touch upon the importance of it as well, that obviously don't check their workers' IDs properly, which in one case led to actually obviously the client making payments to a temp who actually wasn't who they said they were. And needless to say, you know, on a number of levels, this obviously is damaging to the recruitment agency. So not only does obviously the recruitment agency get a right telling off, but obviously the relationship with the end client is always affected. And again, this could, you know, technically be seen as breaking immigration law, and the ultimate penalties are very high for essentially 10 minutes of honestly probably just being lazy. It's not enough just to obviously get someone's passport details. You have to obviously physically verify who they are. And I know that Laura touched upon a couple of things you could do there. See, not having the correct compliance procedures in-house. So interestingly, you know, obviously a lot of our ventures are often investigated by the authorities, obviously responsible for policing the conduct regulations, and ventures, you know, whether they're supported by SSG or not, obviously often get verified. So they come in, they obviously check the registration documents and that they're all in order. And in the case of contractors, that obviously the proper opt-out notifications are in order as well. And basically, generally speaking, they just make sure that all the compliance procedures are not only rigorous, but actually being followed and followed religiously as well. You know, a prime example is obviously, in terms of being sector specific, is of course the education sector. Obviously, there's you need to check if there's obviously the right number of years of referencing for candidates. That's often an area that the authorities continuously tend to check up on. Naturally, things like obviously having up-to-date DBSs and all of that to basically stop the very serious looking HMRC man obviously coming on your door and taking your livelihood away. So again, you know, I guess really that's kind of the end of the webinar this evening. You know, naturally, unlike last time, I'll make sure that we stay we stay on here and answer the 101 questions I'm sure you guys got. But naturally, I guess at this stage, I'm just looking at the website here, so the YouTube page here. If you guys have got any questions, then this will be the time to fire away. Naturally, for the people who obviously have some other things to do on their Wednesday night who aren't here, naturally, you know, if you have any questions, then pop them over to the Recruiters Arms chat page, because obviously we talk there quite a lot. But I'm just going to go through the comments, which are all hellos. Hello. Thanks, Thomas Lee Recruitment. So to be honest, if there's, stay on here for maybe a couple more minutes if there's any questions. But I mean, I guess it's one of those things that you could quite reasonably ramble on for hours, because it's kind of one of those things that, you know, you focus on one area for more than 10 minutes and you can kind of get lost in it. So obviously, I think one of the benefits of a webinar like this is probably to get some feedback around the areas that you would want more info in, because naturally, if we look to do another one, if you guys obviously like what you're hearing, then of course we can delve a little bit deeper into that specific area in terms of the leading the client side of things, or I can just start breakdancing, which might be the thing that you might want.
Which would be epic.
Which would be good.
Any questions?
Don't think so. Clearly just explained it all fantastically. So I think I'm going to try and sign off here in the right way. Obviously be on Discord if anyone needs us, but yeah, brilliant. And obviously chat tomorrow. Give you 10 more seconds. Someone's typing. Brilliant. Cool.
Okay, thanks
Thank
everyone.
you very much.